Hello everyone, welcome to Sriram IAS. In our 1 PYQ a day series, we are going to start with internal security. So when you see a syllabus of internal security, it's quite small, but comparatively questions are appearing in large number in examination. So this question is from 2024. Question is, explain how narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat across the country. Then suggest suitable measures to counter narco-terrorism. Question has two parts. This is first, this is second. Second is quite straightforward. You have to suggest the measures, but first explain how. When you explain something to someone, basically you simplify it, right? है ना? Why simplify? Because it make it easier to understand. समझाइए हिंदी लिखा है वैसे है ना. So now understand it's about how. किस प्रकार. The question is how and not why. Why means generally what causes it. How, impact, or maybe effect, right? So here we have to talk about the effect of the narco-terrorism which are posing or maybe has emerged as a serious threat across the country. That is about the directives used, right? And we have two parts, first and second. Now let's talk about the main keyword used in the question, that is narco terrorism. Understand first, right? Writing is the easy part once you have a clear understanding of a question's demand. Here narco-terrorism, it indicates nexus between the two. Narcotics plus a terrorism. Now when you talk about narcotics, drug trafficking, this is organized crime. And the primary motive or maybe aim of organized crime is financial gain. Monetary, right? But terrorism, the primary aim, violence, right? Simple. Now understand the nexus. When they are getting a monetary benefit out of this organized crime, they are basically using this money to fund the terrorist activities. Of course, a terrorist activities required a fund, but you have to understand there is a convergence. Through convergence only, the word we are getting narco-terrorism. Now, why there is a convergence? Because the territory in which they operate, it's common, mostly common, of course. And then again, the state factor. What does that mean? A state particularly acting as an enemy for both. So, enemy of enemy is a friend. So, there is a convergence between both. So, they can utilize their hideouts, their establishment, right, their connections for the purpose, maybe for the drug trafficking or maybe carrying out the terrorist activities. That is the basic. Once you understand this, we can arrive at this point where these particular aspects and narco-terrorism is emerged as a serious threat. So that will be in the body part. But from these aspects only, you can write down the introduction where you can simply mention, recently, India has seen the increasing instances of the narco-terrorism which led to violence and social disruption. Right? Any kind of introduction is fine. This is one way which is I am deriving out of question statement only. If you have the data or maybe numbers, you can write it down. No harm. Right? So that will be the intro. Convergence, narcotics plus terrorism led to violence, social disturbance. This is one part. Then let's talk about body. Here, from this you can understand narcoterrorism has emerged as a serious threat. So again, a serious threat. You can write narcoterrorism emerged as a serious threat, right? But now how? The question is how, not why. So our geographical proximity is the reason why there is a increase in such instances. But how it has been increased means only because there is a geographical proximity, there is too much convergence with the drug supplying areas and terrorist activities, right? India Pakistan borders, you might have heard about golden crescent, golden triangle. But again, when you talk about how part, you have to mention how it is emerging as an internal security threat. So first thing is violence. Now when there is a violence, basically what happens? It undermines established government. It's just a correlation. You can talk about how violence undermines the people's trust in the ruling government, and then there are always a chances that a social disruption or maybe political agitation will emerge. And whenever there is a disturbance or maybe agitation, that acts as a threat to the internal security, right? Along with that, what it does, disturbances in border areas. If there is a disturbances in border areas, they will act, a local people will act as a hurdle, obstacles in the administrative machineries or maybe even the any act of armed forces, right? That is another part. And whenever there is such instances, again it will reflect in the form of internal security threats, right? Maybe attack by individual over grounds worker. Why they are being involved? Because they lack the trust, a faith in government. There is a violence, right? So disturbances in border area, you can talk about any example like overground worker. Threat, of course they are threat to internal security, right? Besides that, we are also talking about narcotics. Now understand, it's a financial thing. So they are disturbing or maybe destabilizing, disturbing financial institutions. Now we have to understand that illegal money, it will definitely find a route in the formal channels by means of money laundering. है ना? Laundering means what? When you do a laundry, है ना? The soiled or dirty clothes get cleaned like this only. The money get cleaned and that will enter into the financial system. So there will be a disturbances or maybe destabilizing the financial institution. How? Now understand correlation. Internal security threat can be anything where the public or maybe the overall society there is a polarization. Now if there is a price rise, just an example, government is actively working toward providing money or maybe stabilizing the inflation, but somewhere this money is infused in the system which is artificially pushing the inflation further. So maybe there is no money at the consumable hands, frustration, no jobs, social pressure, crime. Ultimately, what will happen? It will reflect in the societal behavior in the form of crimes or maybe disturbances, right? So these are few points. Of course, the question is just a 10 marker, so not much point is essential anyway. But if you wanted to write again in itself, social disruption. Now, why social disruption? Especially Punjab area, northeast area. Now again understand here, drug abuse. youth are in the trap of this drug abuse. Hmm? Now, what will happen in the Punjab areas or maybe Northeast area? They may join the separatist movement here or maybe the insurgent group over here. And of course, again, whenever there is a drug menace, that money can be further utilized, right? It's a complete wave, not just about terrorism, but that fundings of that narcotic money, drug trafficking can even be utilized for funding the Northeast insurgents, right? Any miscreant. This is a perfect link because when you talk about organized crime is entangled with so many internal security threats in itself, right? So social disruption in Punjab and Northeast area. So these 3 to 4 points overall, it's sufficient. You can't write much because this is just a 10 marker question. And the second part of the body is measures. Again, straightforward and simple. Now, when you talk about measures, you have to understand we're talking about here the narco-terrorism. And suggesting measures means something which is not already there. So, most of the people, or maybe one can argue, there has to be a reform in existing NDPS Act, Narcotic Drug and Psychotropic Substances Act, right? What reform? Preventive detention. 1 year to 2 years. I'm talking about reforms. This is there. We can do this, right? Because you have to break the chain of that organized crime, and that organized crime is drug trafficking, right? So, reform in that. Legal reforms besides this as well. But I'm not talking about terrorism. We have prevention of terrorist activities, POTA. We have UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, where now even individual can be designated as a terrorist. So we have so many independent acts to tackle the terrorism. But for when you talk about this narcotics menace, we do not have that individual or maybe independent legislation. So legal reform means independent legislature to tackle drug trafficking. Of course, and associated NAS, it's a part of it. That is the part of legal reform. Now, again, when you're talking about suggesting measures, there is no end to it. Likewise, I can tell you there is a NIA, National Investigation Agency. They have the ambit and maybe coverage of few other crimes, but this particular act is not included under it. One may argue that you can expand the ambit of this National Investigation Agency to include this particular act, where now this agency have authority to investigate those crimes as well. Of course, this is the reform, right? Besides that, when you talk about the reform, you also have to talk about community participation. Now, why? Hmm? From where this drug money is coming? Tell me. From where? The drug money basically means we are consuming it now. It's a part of community. They are consuming it. We have to make them participate, where we need to make them aware a hazardous impact of it, the implication of the legal angle, right? And the family implications as well. There are again so many things. You can talk about regional plus international cooperation. But again, we have a limited space, 10 marker question. So there is not required to write these many points. But even regional cooperation means what? SARC, BIMSTEC. eh? International cooperation means what? Financial Action Task Force, where we can convince that authority and submit the required proof and evidences to show the involvement of Pakistan, right? So they can be included in the grey list or black list. So measures are so many. Now let's talk about conclusion. Now understand, I initially told you about convergence. So basically convergence of crime is happening, है ना? What can be the possible solution to this? Convergence of efforts. Whose efforts I'm talking about? Center, state, citizen. So if you're talking about convergence of the crime, right, in the introduction, that can be perfectly in sync with the conclusion. We are talking about convergence of efforts. So either way, right, there are multiple ways of writing it, but my approach is you should adopt that approach that is very genuine and organic, which can be, you know, clearly possible within that examination hall and conditions, right? So in this way also you can conclude. There are multiple ways of conclusion, and that's why generally I did not mention this as a major, because I kept it for the conclusion part, right? And even if you wanted to conclude on a different note where you can talk about strengthening even or maybe forming a citizens group, right, which can directly coordinate with the state machineries, of course we can do that. There is no limitation for the suggestions, right? Or maybe you can even talk about the integration of AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning, to enhance, of course, here comprehensive integrated border management. That is also a major. We have this integration of AI, ML. So many things can be done, right? So because terrorism is also issue now, so you have to look for this. So either way, but yes, this is how you can simply conclude your answer, right? Thank you everyone.